Good afternoon, welcome. You are tuned into the Labor Forum here at WRFG 89.3 FM. We are so happy to be broadcasting today. Yay! I know those of you who are loyal listeners of both this program and the station as a whole have been totally frustrated by the problems that we've been having with both being able to, for you to be able to hear us on your radio, and all the other issues we've had with the other communication devices that are so commonly held by people now. We are sincerely and truly working on it. It is an issue with AT&T's cables to our station. We hope to have this all resolved, and because of that we have postponed the summer pledge drive. You always, though, are more than welcome to support this station financially by either going online at wrfg.org, calling in at 404-523-8989, or sending a donation to 1083 Austin Avenue, and the zip code is 30307. So my name's Diane Mathowitz, and I'm a retired auto worker, and I've been the fortunate person to be a host of this program for almost 4.5 years now, following in the footsteps of Gary Washington, who initiated this program back in 1986. We always like to give a shout out to Gary. And we want to also give a shout out today because it's a special day for Christopher, our engineer, who's turning a ancient 26. And we are so fortunate to have him. He is a great engineer and is a wonderful supporter and volunteer here at WRFG, and anybody can certainly come along and emulate Christopher. So happy birthday, Christopher. And I want to make sure you are aware that the opinions that are expressed on this program may not necessarily be those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers here at WRFG. And with that, we will go into our labor headlines for Monday, July 13th, 2015. The struggle in Greece continues to demand world attention. A week ago Sunday, 61% of Greek voters, workers, youth, pensioners, the unemployed, defiantly said no to any further austerity measures being imposed on the country by the rapacious banks and governments of the European Union. The referendum had been initiated by the Greek Prime Minister, Alex Tsipras, leader of the Syriza party, which won national elections in January of this year, on a platform of opposing further social service cuts and anti-union legislation. In a stunning about-face, Tsipras came out of intense meetings with the lending countries of the Eurozone, backing a bailout agreement more onerous than one proposed just weeks ago. A July 12th Wall Street Journal article described the deal as, quote, full capitulation, close quote, by Greece, and cited Germany as the primary hitman. In return for up to $96 billion over 3 years in new bailout money, the Greek government has to implement drastic cuts in pensions, add taxes, cut social service budgets, raise the retirement age, agree to privatize regional airports and seaports, and more, all by this Wednesday, 2 days from now. This agreement literally turns over Greek national sovereignty to foreign financial interests for the foreseeable future. It has been widely believed that a goal of the European Union has been regime change in Greece to bring down any government that responded, no matter how weakly, to the suffering of the majority of its people at the hands of capitalist profiteering. This is a message to the anti-austerity resistance in Spain, Italy, Portugal, and elsewhere. Syriza is a coalition of social democrat and left parties and is likely to split over the ultimatum to deepen economic and social misery of the Greek people, perhaps forcing new elections as early as this fall. The German parliament, which also has to approve the bailout agreement and is set to meet on Friday, is requiring passage of these laws before beginning actual negotiations on a deal and releasing any funds. This is not only a test for the Greek working class, but a critical call for global solidarity with the people of Greece. The fight against these predatory banks and corporations, whether in Detroit or Peoplestown or Athens, Greece, unites us all. In national news, a federal trial in Winston-Salem, North Carolina that begins today, Monday, will have big implications for voting rights in that state and potentially across the country. The U.S. Justice Department and several other groups are suing North Carolina over the sweeping election overhaul it passed 2 years ago, which narrowed the early voting period, among other provisions. That early voting window had resulted in a noticeable uptick in the number of minority voters. For decades in the state, black voter turnout lagged far behind white turnout. Then, in 2000, state lawmakers opened up an early voting period. In 2005, they said voters could cast ballots outside their assigned precinct. And in 2007, they enabled same-day registration. After those changes, attorney Allison Riggs says black voter registration and turnout surged. Riggs represents the League of Women Voters, one of the groups that sued North Carolina after Republican lawmakers changed those policies 2 years ago. The overhaul requires voters to show government-issued ID. It eliminates out-of-precinct voting and same-day registration. In the past 2 presidential elections, about 70% of black voters cast their votes early. That compares with about 50% of white voters. Attorney Chris Brooks of the North Carolina ACLU says that overall, quote, "the measures that were passed here in North Carolina are among the most restrictive, if not the most restrictive, in the nation," close quote. Brooks says this case will, quote, "go a long way to deciding whether measures along these lines are going to be upheld in other portions of the nation," close quote. And we know here in Georgia that the legislature here in Georgia also passed a series of restrictions on voting that have had a big impact. And in local news, a wide majority of Delta Airlines' 12,800 pilots rejected a 3-year contract that contained big pay raises, the Airline Pilots Association union said Friday. That was this past Friday, dealing a setback to an airline that has enjoyed unusually strong labor relations with its only major union. We should note that I believe there is an organizing drive currently among Delta's flight attendants. Of the 10,713 pilots who cast ballots, 65% voted against the deal, and the remaining 35% cast ballots for it. Union negotiators reached the tentative accord with management last month after Delta approached the union about having early talks. The 2 sides still have time to come to an agreement. The rejected accord would have superseded a current labor contract that isn't open for renewal until the year's end. While the rejected deal would have raised the average pilot monthly pay by $3,500 by January of 2018, one major point of contention was a change in Delta's profit-sharing plan. The pilots, like the rest of Delta's workforce, most of which is non-union, have a plan in which the company pays out to the employees a total of 10% of pre-tax income up to $2.5 billion, and then 20% of any profit over that amount. Last year, that equated to a 16.6% boost to the pilots' compensation, thanks to Delta's record profit earnings. The contract the pilots rejected would have changed the 20% payout threshold to only a pre-tax profit above $6 billion. Can you believe that? $6 billion with 10% payout for everything below that. So that was a huge drop in that bonus that the Delta workers would get. And that's the conclusion of our labor news. We're going to move right on to Paul McLennan, co-host of the Labor Forum, ATU member with This Week in Labor History.
Thanks, Diane. On July 18th, 1969, a 113-day strike by hospital workers in Charleston, South Carolina ended. For more than 100 days, demonstrations, mass arrests, and a military occupation brought the city of Charleston to a standstill. While the strikers failed to win union recognition, Their protests marked a turning point in Charleston history as the city's black working class asserted its significance as an independent political and social force. This struggle was a classic example of the black feminist principle of intersectionality as issues of race, class, and gender merged during this strike of more than 400 African American hospital workers, mostly female, against the all-white administrations of the Medical College Hospital and Charleston County Hospital. What had begun as a dispute between management and workers quickly transformed into a national and international struggle over civil rights, unionization of public sector workers, and gender roles. Black nurses' aides were paid less than whites for the same work. Along with licensed practical nurses, orderlies, kitchen and laundry staff, the aides were paid $1.30 an hour, 30 cents below the minimum wage. The women dealt with institutionalized racism that included the lack of black students at the nursing school and the lack of black physicians on staff. The catalyst for organizing occurred in February 1967. A white head nurse would not give 5 black workers the customary access to patients' charts so they could provide appropriate care. So they refused to work and were fired. The 5 then asked Mary Moultrie, a black nurse's aide, to help them. She talked with Bill Saunders, a factory worker, activist, and community liaison with the local office of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and Isaiah Bennett, a veteran union organizer. Small groups of workers began secretly meeting weekly at local churches and union halls. The workers were reinstated, but the meetings continued, and attendance slowly increased to several hundred. Charleston County Hospital workers, led by Rosetta Simmons, joined the meetings. During these discussions, workers found that they faced the same discriminatory attitudes and practices throughout the hospital. The workers concluded they needed a national union to represent them. Bennett suggested Local 1199 of the retail, wholesale, and department store workers, which had already organized hospital workers in New York City. In March 1969, after 2 years of local organizing efforts, the workers established the first hospital union branch in the country, Local 1199B of the National Healthcare Workers Union. On March 18th, Medical College Hospital President William McCord met with Moultrie and a delegation of workers. Convinced that negotiations in good faith were not possible, Moultrie and her colleagues walked out of the meeting. Other workers joined, and they briefly took over the president's office in protest. After the workers returned to work, 12 of them were fired. That night, Local 1199B voted to go on strike, demanding recognition of the union, a grievance procedure, a 30-cent increase in the minimum hourly wage, and the rehiring of the fired strikers. On March 20th, the strike began. The strike took Charleston's white and black leaders by surprise because it was built on more than a year of grassroots organizing by people who were largely unknown to the city's elites. On March 29th, Charleston County Hospital workers also went on strike. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference arrived in Charleston on March 31st. They saw the Charleston strike as a way to work with Local 1199B in a union power, soul power alliance. On April 25th, 101 demonstrators were arrested, and Governor McNair ordered more than 500 National Guardsmen with fixed bayonets and armored personnel carriers to patrol city streets. On April 29th, Coretta Scott King addressed a mass rally of 3,000 supporters at Emmanuel AME Church. Yes, that's the same Emmanuel AME Church that we've come to know. Hospital workers had been working full-time jobs at part-time pay, she noted in her address. After all, $1.30 an hour is not a wage, it is an insult. She then added, I also have another interest for being here, and that is many of the hospital workers throughout our nation are women, black women, many of whom are the main supporters of their families. I feel that the black woman in our nation, the black working woman, is perhaps the most discriminated against of all of the working women, the black woman. On May 1st, McNair ordered a curfew in Charleston and declared a state of emergency in the city as the strike dragged on and frustrations grew. Supporters honored SCLC's call for a boycott of city businesses. Convention and tourist business shriveled up. Observers estimated that the strike ultimately cost Charleston more than $15 million in lost revenue. Economic pressures intensified political pressure to settle the strike. On Mother's Day, more than 5,000 marchers denounced the refusal of the state to negotiate. Leaders of the mostly black and International Longshoremen Association talked about closing the port of Charleston to increase pressure for a fair settlement. Meanwhile, negotiations led to an agreement. The 12 fired workers would be rehired, pay would be raised to the federal level, and a formal grievance procedure and a credit union would be established. But no union recognition or official collective bargaining would be permitted. The workers accepted the compromise. The medical college hospital strikers claimed victory, and Charleston County hospital workers soon settled their strike on similar terms. The strike's results were historic. The women believed that their actions had led to a new relationship of mutual respect and dignity on the job and to improved race relations in the community. In 1970, Charleston elected its first black state legislator since Reconstruction, as well as several black city council members. But Local 1199B in Charleston folded after a year, undercut by its lack of official standing and an inability to collect dues. 25 years after the strike, Mary Moultrie lamented that a lot of things change, and then you see them gradually regressing. In April of this year, Mary Moultrie passed away at the age of 73. We were all black, predominantly women, and many of us were heads of households, Moultrie recalled. The majority of us were out there for the cause. Still, more than 45 years later, organized labor remains weak in the state, with just 3.7% of the state's workforce unionized. Moultrie's daughter, Arnice Moultrie, said her mother's sympathy for workers and for related causes was ever present into her later years. She always was for the underdog, the little guy, said Arnice Moultrie. That was just ingrained in her and ingrained in me.
Thank you very much, Paul. That's really an interesting historical footnote because we have been talking obviously about the massacre, the racist massacre at Emanuel AME, and have had members of the ILA that played that role on the air as well. Thank you so much, and I don't know, Christopher, do we have a message now or should we do it later at 4:30? We'll do it later at 4:30. Okay, we're going to move right into some. We're really excited about this guest, young woman who's taking a leadership role with the Turner Field Community Benefits Coalition. And some of you may have seen both some TV coverage and an article in the Atlanta paper last week when a whole group of 60 plus people went to downtown to City Hall. Yes. So we have Sohna Harzeez here with us. She is representing that coalition. And we've talked a lot, Sohna, on this program about the impact or the negative impact that often comes when developers decide to put big things, whether it's stadiums, the Falcons Stadium, the Braves Stadium, wherever, in neighborhoods, oftentimes working class neighborhoods, where the folks never really had much of an opportunity to talk about whether they wanted this big thing in their neighborhoods. So could you tell us the background of how you got involved and what the Turner Field Community Benefits Coalition is? And welcome to WRFG.
Thank you. Well, I got involved through a community organization, Pittsburgh Community Improvement Association, and working with Annie E. Casey as well. They let me know about the coalition that was forming, so I got in on ground level.
You're okay. Go ahead.
So the Turner Field Community Benefits Coalition is a coalition that aims to be sure that the communities are heard with the redevelopment of Turner Field. It's pretty much just making sure that the city does what the city said that it would do. It would allow the communities in the area to make plans for their communities without doing a back-end deal, if you will, with selling the property without the community's voice being involved.
Okay, so the neighborhood that we're talking about, Peoplestown, that neighborhood, first it was the first Brave Stadium,
Yes.
then it was the Olympics,
Mhm.
and it's now whatever they're gonna do when they tear or down or alter this stadium, and so, and it was also I-20. I think when the interstate went through, it also devastated that neighborhood. So, so given that, money talks, and mostly poor people then have to walk.
Yes.
How is it that you all are organizing, or what is it that you are, how are you putting the city administration and whoever their feet to the fire? What is it you all are doing?
Well, one of the main things that we're doing is realizing and starting to realize more and more the power of people. So even though you have big corporations, you have the people who are on, let's say, the lower rung of the totem pole, for lack of a better phrase, who are actually fueling these large money-making machines, if you will. So we're trying to do, because it's a lot more than People's Town. For instance, I live in the Pittsburgh neighborhood. So even though the stadium is not directly in my neighborhood, we actually get all the traffic heading that way. And then you have, Summerhill, Mechanicsville, you even have Ormwood. We have the Sands, South Atlanta. So we
That's
have
my
different.
neighborhood.
All right, hello. So we have all of these different groups, neighborhoods coming together. We also have businesses and community organizations also coming together. We've even had some GSU students to join us and trying to be sure that what the community wants is all a part of, what happens in that area, and not just something that somebody says that we should want actually be developed there.
So I know one of the things I've heard when I read the article, that you delivered a letter to the mayor, and you delivered a letter to all the city council people and the
Yes.
Fulton County Commission and some other folks who have some say in this. So it often turns out that how anybody finds out about something happening is a big headline in the newspaper and it's a done deal. Where is it truly at in terms of this redevelopment? Is there a done deal, or is there a deal that might be cooking, or where is it at?
We'd like to hope that it's not a done deal. I know where we're at right now is we're making sure that we are fully researching the powers that be, the people that have say in it, so that we know who to come to, who to talk to, being sure that we refine our deliverance to them, such as even with the letter, being sure that we have a transparency in our process, which is the same thing that we're asking from our city government, is to be sure that they're transparent. I mean, after all, we in a way put them in office. So just being sure that they're fully aware of what's going on. So there's no surprise attack. It's, here's the letter, here's our demand, just for you to live up to what you said that you were going to do. That's what we're asking. And that is, again, to be sure that the neighborhoods are able to plan, because the neighborhoods receive city money in order to do so. So it's really like you're throwing away your own money, which I don't know if they even care about. But we just want to be sure that that process takes place. Here is our letter. We're still waiting on a response from those letters that were sent out as well. So.
You said earlier that before the show, that you lived in DC. Can
Yes.
you talk about how similar what's happening around this stadium and what happened in the neighborhood you lived in? How similar it is?
It is very similar. Actually, I lived in Landover, Maryland. So the stadium was like literally built in our backyard. When the Redskins win a game, they keep their lights on all night, and it's like our whole neighborhood just lit up. Like it's not even nighttime. But it is very similar. We had, I'm not sure exactly how organized the neighborhoods were, but there was a lot of concern about what was going to take place on the land, because it was a farm before that was pretty much abandoned. And so there was a church and the stadium and homes and I want to say the boulevard at the Cap Center was like another shopping area that's pretty much built using that farmland.
Mhm.
So there were a lot of concerns about, you know, people have this idea of gentrification or something, say re-gentrification, that certain things kind of dictate what's to come. You know, if you don't ask community input, is that your way of saying you don't care about the current community because you're trying to bring in another community? So people do have those. The same here. We have organizations that are concerned about displacement of the current residents as well. So there are a lot of similarities. I think it's kind of ironic that I moved from one situation to pretty much the same situation, but this time I'm able to be involved, so I'm happy about that.
Good.
So, if there were our listeners out there that would be interested in getting involved or getting more information, how could they possibly do that? I know that anybody can go up on Google, Turner Field Benefits, Community Benefits Coalition. That's probably the easiest thing. But is there a meeting? Do you all have regular meetings or anything like that?
We have regular meetings, and if anybody wants to get involved, they're willing to put their feet to the fire, if you will. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. On Twitter, we're at TF Coalition, TF like Turner Field Coalition. You can find us on Facebook at Turner Field Community Benefits Coalition on Facebook, and even on the website. So.
Great. So I know we had Vincent Ford on a couple of weeks ago, and he raised the Turner Field Community Benefits Coalition as a really positive sign about working class and poor neighborhoods, and just people in a neighborhood being able organizing, and what a great step forward that was, because the neighborhoods need to be heard. People
Yes.
need to be heard. The issues of traffic, the issues of noise, the issues, all these things are of concern.
Yes, he was actually there for when we did the press conference to deliver the letter. So I'm really hoping that, you know, with him being there, with Abel Mabel being there, that we really do, that they see that it's not just a group of poor people, that it's not just a group of people who live in certain neighborhoods, that it's really something that affects people all around the city.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you don't live here, work here, it's like you kind of come to play or worship. You know, people drive through, go see friends, so.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
in today. And obviously, keep us informed here at WRFG and at the Labor Forum about anything that's coming up.
WRFG.
And we'll certainly look forward to having you on again.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will go
No,
ahead
this
and
is
take
not
a brief break, and then we have what's really going to be an ATU or
Okay,
an
hold on one moment.
Amalgamated Transit Union Marathon here. We're going to have our guests here in the studio who are with the MARTA, the MARTA workers here in Atlanta. We're going to have a guest calling in from Milwaukee, from Local 998. And we also have the president, international president, on the line, Larry Hanley. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back.